Hello folks, welcome to Break the Code. So today we'll be discussing about the Cloudflare outage of November 18, 2025. It affected many of the day-to-day applications on the internet, including X, Spotify, ChatGPT, League of Legends, Canva, etc. Before diving deep, let's look quickly on the topics that we'll be going through today. I'll be discussing high-level introduction of Cloudflare. How exactly is a user request processed by Cloudflare, which will be needed to understand the failure reason? Details of how the failure occurred, how the issue was resolved, look at all the Cloudflare services affected, and finally, how the issue could have been caught earlier. For those of you who are not aware of what Cloudflare is, it is an essential part of the internet that provides services like Anycast DNS service, CDN services for serving static content, security to origin server from the attacks like DDoS, and a faster response to the end users, etc. Apart from this, it also provides the other services like workers, KV, turnstile, dashboard, etc. Now let's take a look at what happens when a user sends a request to a server that is using Cloudflare system. The user encrypted request first travels to Cloudflare DNS server via the internet service provider, which is then decrypted, and Cloudflare can see all the data of the request till transport link. Then it performs few basic validations like checking if the request was being made by a bot. So you might have seen a phrase like verifying you are a human when traveling to certain web pages. Also, it checks the request against web application firewall rules of the server and also sees if there is a DDoS attack happening against the server and prevent them. All these functionalities are performed within a time limit of 1 to 2 milliseconds, which is small. Finally, when everything looks good with the request, it checks if the user is requesting some static data which might be cached with Cloudflare CDN. Then it is returned by the CDN service. Else, Cloudflare sees if there is an existing connection that is open with the server and can be reused, or recreates a new connection and finally directs a request to the origin server. When a user sends a request for an origin server using the Cloudflare system, then the Cloudflare performs HTTP or TLS termination. This happens for two reasons. One is that setting up a new TLS connection takes up a lot of time due to multiple round trips involved, whereas Cloudflare already has connection open with the server, so it can be reused and thus client will be served faster. And second is that as all the requests to the server go through the Cloudflare, servers are more secure. Frontline is the brain of the Cloudflare. It has several modules like rate limiting, bot management, WF, etc. Module of our address today is bot management. This is the module that uses feature file to run ML logic and check if the request is made by a bot or not. Currently, this file contains around 60 features, and the instances running this module are configured to allow up to 200 features, which is more than 3 times of 60. Post which the system breaks as the exception is not handled in a graceful manner by the Cloudflare instances. This was the first mistake in the Cloudflare system. Now, in order to keep up with the attackers, Cloudflare refreshes these files at a regular cadence of few minutes. These files are refreshed by running a query in the ClickHouse cluster, which has a distributed tables using sharding under the default database, as well as a replica of the default database called R0. With the distributed query run, it fetches the record from system.columns metadata table for HTTP request features table. Note that this distributed query does not mention which database to use, and thus the cluster will run the query in all the databases which the current user has permission to view. This was the second mistake. Before the outage, a change was made in the query behavior. Earlier, these queries used to run via shared account, and thus users had implicit access to the database through a set of rules defined. But then the permissioning logic was made more explicit for fine-grained access to the database system. Post this change, users had access to the replica database as well. So the query started fetching duplicate records. This in turn caused the number of features in the feature file to grow more than 200. which were then distributed to the Cloudflare instances across the world at the same time, which is mistake number 3. And thus the bot management module broke all across the globe. Earlier it was being considered as a DDoS attack, but once the root cause was determined, the issue was fixed by stopping the propagation of bad feature file and manually adding the previous good version of the correct feature file to the distribution queue. This affected a lot of internal Cloudflare services, including workers, KV turnstile, CDN, and dashboard. This issue could have been avoided if there were some basic practices followed. I'm sure Cloudflare engineers follow the highest standard, but the internet broke because of a sequence of mistakes that could have been avoided. Having a prod parallel environment that exactly mimics the production could have caused the issue to be caught on an earlier basis. Performing region-based feature rollout was another way of ensuring that global outage does not occur. And third, having monitors around the file size would have caused the alarms to ring right after the issue occurred, so that it could have been fixed earlier. One interesting behavior during the outage was that in the first 1.5 hours, the error count dropped several times, and thus the requests were served successfully and there were failure again until a later time when the system started showing consistent signs of failure. This happened because the ClickHouse database cluster was gradually being updated to modify the access logic, and until this change was applied completely, there were parts of the cluster that had old access logic, and when the query ran on those parts, it generated correct feature files, which were again distributed to the instances running globally, causing the new user request to be processed correctly for some time until there was an update again with the bad file. That's all for today, folks. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit like and do subscribe.